Hello and welcome back to the Fight and Talk 2 channel with myself, Mr. Fight and Talk, aka Connor, joined as always by the fantastic co-host Prath. Prath, how we doing, bro?
I'm doing great, my man. How you doing?
Man, good man. Yeah, all good, man. All good. I thought we'd just do a little episode and we wanted to talk about weight cutting. So naturally, we want to pick the best person on MMA Twitter that I know anyway, and that's Brian from Mad Dog MMA. So thank you very much, Brian, for joining us on the channel. You know, you've been a big fan of the show for a while and we really appreciate it. You're obviously from a completely different country to us. So for us, it means so much that you even tune in and stuff like that. So thank you so much for joining us on the channel, man.
No, it's a great show, and I'm just happy that you guys have me here, and I'm ready to get this going. Let's talk about some weight cutting.
That's it. That's it. But Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. What got you into MMA? And I know we were talking a little bit before we pressed record about your, wrestling background and stuff like that. So just hit us up with your CV, man.
Yeah, I started wrestling when I was in like fifth grade, all throughout high school. When I joined the Navy, when I was in the Navy, I actually got cancer, and after I got cancer, when I was I gained a shitload of weight, just to be honest with you guys. And my dad told me, he said, you got to find something you love again. And what I did is I went to a local MMA gym and I started fighting again, or I started fighting. And it's just, I've fell in love with it. So, I've always been into this sport since then. Guys like Vanderlei Silva and stuff like that, their highlights have always gotten me pumped up. And so that's what really got me into the sport. And now my kids are older and they're wrestling, and so it's just a never-ending thing around us.
Nice one, man. I always get so jealous of Americans because you have that wrestling background. Do you know what I mean? You're doing wrestling from such a young age. We spoke about this, and over here you literally have like tennis, basketball, and rounders. Do you know what I mean? And you guys have got like all the best sports, like American football. You got baseball, and it's crazy that you can do all this kind of stuff from such a young age, man.
Yeah, it is. It's nuts, and and from a young age, I know we're getting into the weight cutting situation. From a young age, it is bred into us to cut that weight, and to the lower weight you are, the better you're going to be. And I remember my brother being 9 years old and being in a trash bag and spitting out candy. He would get saliva in his mouth and spit out candy. And he's 9 years old doing this, So, I mean, it's bred into us. And then, you go to high school. And then if you're good enough, you go to college. And if you're good enough, you go to the Olympics. And it's all the same. Everything is, the lowest weight wins. So, but that's it.
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. So we are going to talk about weight cutting in this episode, and I think the perfect person to start off with talking about weight cutting and weight gaining, for instance, is the notorious Conor McGregor. Prath, where's this guy been? Where's he started? Where's he finishing? How's he looped himself up? Talk to us about Conor McGregor's kind of life cycle of his weight cutting.
Yeah, so I think for me, Connor, and we were talking about this before we jumped on as well, is almost like Connor and Frankie are like the opposites of each other in terms of their trajectory and weight. And I think for me, the thing that's really interesting about Connor and watching him in the UFC is when he came in at 145, is even though he looked really ghoulish on the scales, he was still, because that's all we knew of him, we kind of just accepted that that was the regular Conor McGregor and he was coming out to fight. Now, cut forward to, was it 2015, and he's scheduled to fight Nate Diaz at 170. You look at the difference in just his fight week in general, you can see like the miserable procedure of going through a weight cut. And I think the best person to speak about the feeling of a weight cut is definitely going to be Brian here. But I can definitely just see, just from a visual perspective alone, the nutrition that is required to be able to compete on a higher level is not something that is attainable when you look at a guy like Conor McGregor at 145. So I think it's a terrible decision to cut so much weight, and the reason why is because you're taking liquid out of your body and you're about to go into a fist fight. And I think that is one of the telltale signs as to why Conor was good at 145, and I feel like his size advantage really, really gave him that. And I think that's like, well, obviously this is one thing we'll circle around to, as Brian just mentioned, is kind of a mentality that's ingrained into American culture of sports like that. And we aren't as familiar with that over here in the UK and in Ireland and things like that. So when you look at someone like Conor, the only real the only real things he has to compare it to is boxing, and I don't think they have nearly as bad weight cuts as they do in mixed martial arts. But I definitely just wanted to get some impressions from Brian, for instance. Like I personally don't know that anguish and feeling of being at your real lowest weight. Tell me kind of what's going on there and what's going through your body, because I can visually he looks like a ghost, but internally, what is he feeling?
Well, that's why, I talk about it. I was thinking about this earlier, is no matter how many times you've done it and how much you've prepared in the long run, you know, the last few pounds is probably the worst. And like I said, you can look at numerous fighters, and just like Mike Perry, for instance. I'm not a big fan of Mike Perry, but when he came out and said on his Twitter that I've already cut 14 pounds, I've got 6 to go, but this is terrible. And now people will sit there and say, well, 6 pounds, in 12 hours is not that bad. No, it's bad, because you've already depleted your body of all the water. You've already, you hit a wall at some point. And once you hit that wall, if you don't have the right people around you and the right team around you, that wall is going to defeat you every time. And obviously, if you're going to have your girlfriend in your corner, like Mike Perry does, you're not going to have the right person to go ahead and keep pushing you, telling you, get back in that sauna, get on that bike, get on that, that treadmill and just walk it out. So, like I said, those last few pounds are always miserable, but, like I said before, it's bred into us. And most of the people that you see that have, that have these crazy weight cuts are people that have wrestled in the past. Your Johnny Hendricks, these guys have all wrestled in the past. Faber, Cruz, these guys that are Dillashaw, these guys that are just killing themselves with the weight cuts are former wrestlers. But it's just that's what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think Conor is a good example of someone that is outside of that sphere, but has looked at what those guys have done and just tried to implement it in his own way. And I think that was a little bit to his disadvantage, but I think the size advantage that allowed him to have the reach to be able to fight these guys. And obviously this was pre-USADA, when the only fight that he had after that at 145 was the Aldo fight, and that Mendes fight was the first fight where they were, USADA, they were using USADA for those procedures. So what his replenishment looked like after he had that 145 weight cut will be something that would be quite mysterious, because when you look at him the next day, he does look like a completely different person. Yeah. And when you look at him fight Nate Diaz at 170, he looks like Conor. He looks like a normal, healthy Conor McGregor. And I think when you now look at him at 155, he is at the optimum weight. 145, a little bit too much. 170, a little bit too easygoing. 155, he has to still cut a little bit of weight. And I think that discipline really works for some people. And something that Conor often talks about that he really hates is guys that are like 300 pounds cutting down to 265. And I get why that would annoy him. But I think that is also something that really motivates those guys to get down to that weight. And I think that's that fight week kind of battle that people have. And I think when you find your optimum weight class, like you look at Masvidal, right? Masvidal was at 155 looking terrible, went up to 170 and knocked out Till, who's a 185er. Like if you look at it from that kind of mass perspective, it's very bizarre. But it does make sense when you look at how Masvidal is on the scales, when you look at him during the fight. I think for me, fight week, the two or 3 days before the actual scales, really shows a lot about what they look like fight week. And I think that shows it shows the mentality. It shows the way that they, especially when they're very low weights, like a Conor McGregor at 45. When he's at like 150, you could tell he is struggling to get those last 5 pounds off. So yeah, it's just a crazy method of organizing these fighters into weight categories. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And the other thing as well is that the fighters need to kind of account for the fluid that they're going to keep while they're flying over to these places. You know, people from Europe and stuff fighting over in the East Coast of America or the West Coast or whatever, they've got to be on a plane for 9, 12 hours, whatever it might be. And they're going to be holding a lot of water when they get there. I think the UFC only pay for them to go 2 weeks before, or maybe a week before. So they've got to really, you know, think about how they're going to be cutting the weight when they go over to a different country, acclimatizing straight away to the time difference and the heat difference or the cold difference, whatever it may be. All of these things need to be taken into consideration when they're cutting weight. And it must be so difficult for fighters that are, you know, coming from colder countries, going and fighting in, you know, Brazil or something, for instance, where they're going to go over there and it's going to be super hot. It might be easier to cut weight, but then you almost might cut too much weight. You're getting on the scales weighing too little. You've dehydrated yourself too much. And we've seen it so many times in Abu Dhabi as well, when people have gone over there and they've lost a little bit too much weight on the scales. They've kind of come in half a pound under. They don't look right and stuff like that. But as you said, Prath, there's a lot of fighters that have gone from 155 to 170. Till's a perfect example. He was cutting loads of weight. And you can see on YouTube, there's loads of videos of him cutting weight where he's just under like 50 towels. He's walking on treadmills covered in towels. He's laying down after doing a 3-minute walk and he just looks completely dead. But then these fighters are getting in the octagon and they're 25, 30 pounds heavier than they were the day before. Surely that can't be good for you either. Brian, what's your experience with hydration as well?
Well, with USADA coming in and saying that you cannot do IV hydration anymore, pretty much they've stopped doing that because they wanted to eliminate blood doping. But I wanted to circle around on what you said, like about Till being, you know, in towels and his extreme weight cut and stuff. There are numerous fighters out there to do it, and one of them is Khabib Nurmagomedov. If you go back out there and look, you know, you can see him passing out. He's pulled out of fights because of complications of weight cutting. And if you know, when you go and look at his fight with Michael Johnson, when he got touched on the chin, he was on skates for at least 2 minutes. I mean, he was hurt. And so, you know, you can't tell me that the weight cutting is not affecting these fighters' chin. You know what I mean? And I'm not taking anything away from Corey Sandhagen or anything like that, or Brian Ortega with their knockout of Frankie Edgar. But when you got a guy that looks cut at 155 and then you take him down to 145 and then you take him down to 135, that chin is going to be a little bit weaker than it was at 155. And case in point is when he fought Gray Maynard and they had a war and he took massive shots and then came back and beat him. You know, I mean, your chin is a lot stronger at a heavier weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why DC doesn't want to cut the weight. Obviously, being a wrestling man yourself, Brian, you're a big fan of DC, so I'm not going to put too much shade on him. But there was a lot of kind of hate on him for wanting to be a heavyweight anyway, because he was struggling so much to get to 205. But I think from my memory, he's only like 5'10". So to be sat at 205 is probably not too bad for his like stature and stuff. But he was like, no, I want to fight at 135, 140 and stuff like that. But why would he want to fight so much heavier? So he has his wrestling can really take over and he can use that weight.
You know, with DC, you know, I know that the towel controversy is going to come up. You know, that was an old trick that he got away with. And, you know, I guess we'll just leave it at that. But 205, you know, it was a good weight for him. But I think we're going to get into a different conversation than weight cutting, but he cleared out that division besides John Jones. So what was left for him? Let's go up to heavyweight. Let's go ahead and go to the weight that I'm undefeated at. Let's go ahead and challenge for the championship. So, you know, I think you know, for him to go up in that weight it made sense. Now, you know, with the Frankie Edgar thing, you know, I felt like he was chasing a championship. You know, he wanted that glory back, but he just kept on running into monsters with Aldo and Holloway. And I mean, unfortunately, it ended pretty bad for him on a couple weeks ago. But you know, it's sad, but it is what it is.
No, completely.
One thing I'd love to touch on as well in regards to Cormier at heavyweight is that I think a lot of the rhetoric beforehand was that Kane was the top guy, right? So DC doesn't want to go up and fight for the heavyweight title, so he went down to 205. And I remember when Kane came back and he fought Francis Ngannou, there was talk of Kane potentially going down to 205, and I think that probably would have made more sense than DC going down to 205, despite their frames being sizably different. So I think you have to really factor these things in. And I think, DC must have believed in his heart of hearts that he would have been able to make 205. And, to his credit, he did quite a few times. And that's not easy for someone who doesn't, has visibly taken his career down the route of, okay, I don't need to be the biggest person to win these fights. I can just go in with the skill set I have and the training confidence I have, training with a Cain Velasquez, training with people like Luke Rockhold, who were top tier at that time. And that actually pains me to say that Luke Rockhold is top tier in any way, shape, or form. But he was, at that time, he was a top tier middleweight. So I think looking at Luke Rockhold, who's potentially smaller, looking at Cain Velasquez, who is the champion at heavyweight, that was the only place he could really fit in. But we don't know what was going through DC's mind at that time, when he must have been absolutely crapping himself to be able to go down to 205, and the prospect of having to cut that much weight. And I'm sure, I don't know what he wrestled at the Olympics, but I'm sure it wasn't 205.
I think it was like 182.
Even less than that.
Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah. But it was a little bit lower. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I was expecting him to wrestle at about the 200 pound. It
might be like 197 or something like that. But
right.
But he struggled on that too. I mean, if you go back and look at his Olympic career, the second day, the crazy thing about the Olympics is you have to make weight both days, or the whole every day of the tournament. So these guys are cutting weight, and then they're going out and wrestling 3 matches, and then they're going to have to go back to the hotel that night and cut more weight. And then what happens with DC? His kidneys fail. He goes to the hospital. He wants to wrestle again, but they say, no, you can't wrestle anymore. It's over. So, the weight cutting problem is not just in, I don't even say it's a problem. I don't want to say that I'm anti weight cutting at all, but the weight cutting situation it's not only in the UFC or MMA, it's also in wrestling and, other sports like that. So
wrestling, boxing, judo, taekwondo, any other Olympic sport that requires a weight category will often be played with people trying to, because, obviously because steroids are so outlawed, and I think that will obviously be something we talk about with blood doping a little bit more deeply. But I think, try and take every advantage that you can get. And if every advantage means that you're just a little bit bigger than the other person, then I think you have to take those advantages, because you never know. When you look at the Russian athletes that all got done for blood doping, and you look at someone like Jordan Burroughs, who you mentioned before we started the podcast, he took I don't know how you would say, he took umbrage with that. And I don't blame him, because when you look at it, he has ticked every single box that he's needed to do, including cutting the weight and getting down to that weight class, doing it over multiple days and things like that. And the other Russian guys being able to use EPO and, steroids and blood doping and things like that. So I can see why they would want to get down to their lowest weight. But again, is it the smartest thing to do? Probably not.
No, completely. And when we talk about fighters, obviously we spoke about DC coming down a little bit and going up, but he's at the end of the spectrum with regards to, heavyweight has got a massive kind of gap where you can be at any weight in between that. But then when you look at someone like TJ Dillashaw, for instance, who went from 35 to 25, I believe, to fight Henry Cejudo, and then he obviously got caught doing EPOs. If you cannot make the weight to get down to such a small weight for your frame, don't bother. If you need to rely on performance enhancing drugs or, weight loss pills and stuff like that to get down that low, don't take the fight. Why? Because obviously he's been suspended for 2 years, which is a massive blow to his career in the prime of his career as well. Why would you do that? But as you say, Brian, is there a lot of pressure on the wrestlers and stuff to compete at such a low level? Why can't they just go into the gym and be like, look, I weigh 90 kilos or 150 pounds or whatever. Why can't I just fight at that weight? Is there a pressure that comes behind it?
I really do. I think it's all about money. With the TJ Dillashaw situation with Henry Cejudo, do you guys remember the the angle that he was coming in to kill that weight class. That he was going to come in, he was going to beat Henry Cejudo, and then 125 was going to be totally gone. Well, obviously that didn't happen. You know, you move on. There, I think in gyms, you know, there is a pressure for you to get down to a certain weight. You know, you don't want to go in if your natural weight is DC's natural weight is what it should be 180, but unfortunately it's, you know, like 245. Yeah.
He's looking closer to 300 at the moment.
Yeah, mate. Big boy. Big boy.
But you know, if we go look at somebody like Clay Guida, you know, Clay Guida has never been knocked out at 155. To my knowledge, he's never been knocked out at 155. But when he cut down to 145, he was pieced up by Mendez, Bermudez, and Ortega. And, you know, I think that if the wrestlers in their mind that when they say, well, this weight's not working out for me, I'm not going to go up, I might as well try to go down. And that's just like I said earlier at the beginning, is it's bred into your head that, you know, going down is the way to go. Now, if you go look at, in 1997, there was a wrestler from Michigan, John Reese. Okay. He was 21 years old. He died from cutting weight because he got beat out at 158 and he tried to get down to 150 and he died. And this was a month after another wrestler decided to try to cut weight. He died in a sauna suit and a rubber suit, you know. And now wrestlers, you know, wrestling has come a long way since then. You know, that was 1997. But that's the mindset to these guys, is that they say, well, instead of me going up in weight, I'm going to try to go down in weight, because my size, once I hydrate and once I get bigger, it's going to be an advantage. But what they don't think about is the toll that it's putting on your body, right? That the even mentally, it's putting on your body. You know, you sit there in a sauna and you say, you know, you're 2 pounds away and you get out 15 minutes later and you've only cut 0.2, you know, and you have to get back in that sauna. So it's a mental thing too. You know, you sit there, is this worth it? And what am I doing right now? Is what I'm doing right now going to be worth it? And if you get into that octagon or on that wrestling mat and you lose, I mean, that destroys you mentally. Let's look at Renan Barão. Renan Barão was at one time the pound for pound king. They were calling him the pound for pound king. And what happens? He goes in, he has trouble cutting weight. He passes out, bumps his head for the TJ Dillashaw rematch, I think it was. But he was never the same. And at one point, like we said before the show, he was the top dog in the UFC. So weight cutting doesn't just affect you mentally or physically, it affects you mentally as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, we saw it with Dustin Poirier as well. When he was down at 145, he obviously got rocked by Conor McGregor because he was taking too much weight out, and his chin was, exactly like you put it, his chin was defenseless. Do you know what I mean? He couldn't do anything at 145, but then he had a massive run at 155, which is a fantastic weight for him, because I doubt that he cuts too much. But then when he fought Max Holloway was coming from 45, who looked very good at 145, but he's probably walking around at 150, 155, I'd imagine, whereas Dustin was walking around at 170, and then they've kind of met in the middle, but someone's still going to go into the octagon at a massive, massive weight division above you. Do you know what I mean? And Dustin obviously completely destroyed Max Holloway, but Max Holloway's chin withheld the whole time. And, you know, credit to him, because he's a fantastic fighter. But, you know, I just wanted to put that out there, that there's been so many people jumping around in divisions, and it doesn't always go the right way. Sometimes it really goes a very bad way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you're right. You're 100% right that there's not a bad thing. You know, there's not a if you're 170, you're cutting 155. That's not bad. No. But if you're Johnny Hendricks and you're 26 pounds overweight with 72 hours left, and you need to cut that weight, that's where it kills you. You know what I mean? What's that? Tibiao. Gosh, what's his name? Tibiao. They said that he cut 66 pounds to get to his fight at 155. Look it up. Look it up. Look, I have it in my notes somewhere. But
crazy.
go ahead.
I was actually just going to talk about Johnny Hendricks. Actually, you brought him up, and I wanted to use him as an example of going up in a weight class and not necessarily having that success. And that is due to him going through those terrible 170 weight cuts, being so mentally broken from those 170 weight cuts. And, the rhetoric around Johnny Hendrick when he was continuously missing weight was that, I don't have the IVs. I can't rely on the IVs to get back up. And it's like, you can't even get to 170 to then rehydrate up. When you get to 185, who then we expect, Johnny, this is 185 now. Johnny's going to come out. He's the former champion. Let's see how he does. And because I do feel like he got mentally broken from continuously missing weight. And I think the last real notable one was that Tyron Woodley one. And outside of that, the other one was the Kelvin Gastelum fight. Yeah. Not Kelvin Gastelum. He was supposed to be fighting someone on that New York card. He always got matched up with Donald Cerrone because Kelvin Gastelum missed weight. But I can't remember who he was fighting on that card. But that was the last time I really remember Johnny Hendricks really crashing and failing to make that 170 weight class. And it's really disheartening because he is a former champion and someone that we really rooted for. Like when you watch that first Robbie Lawler fight, you really rooted for Johnny Hendricks to win, coming off of what should have been his GSP win. Yeah. And I think somewhere along the line, obviously he then got beaten by Lawler, but he was always a guy that, when he got onto the scale, he would either miss it the first time, have to come back the second time and do it, or he would do it and be, surprised on the scale. They would say, Johnny Hendricks 170. He's like, yeah, oh my God. And it's like, that's your job, dude. That's what you signed on the contract to show up and do. And you're surprised, like, who would have expected Johnny Hendricks to make 170? Dude, we were all surprised you made 170. and then yeah, it was crushing to then see him go up to 185 and still just never really hit that stride. And I think it was him being mentally broken at a lower weight class, going up to a higher weight class and fighting with that same mentality.
And here's the thing is, you touched on that going up to the scale that first time, he always looked dejected. Like he was always like, here we go. Who on his team was saying we should go weigh in right now? Like, I guess there is a time limit. So, I guess that is an aspect of it, but you were never confident when Johnny Hendricks was on the card. You were never confident that he was going to make weight. Did he miss weight at 185 too, though? I think he missed weight
the first time out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was that's when they kicked him. He was gone.
Yeah.
But, like I said, and like you said, it's a mental game and you lost the mental game. One of his team, somebody in his team should have said, Johnny, we can't do this anymore. You know what I mean? It's impossible for you to get to this weight. You're not as young as you used to be. You obviously are not working. I'm not going to say that. I can't say that somebody's not working hard. You know what I mean? But
you're entirely right, though. And at that end of that week, that was what makes or breaks someone. And by the way, I just remembered it was so the New York fight was supposed to be his first fight at 185, and he fought Paulo Costa.
Yes.
And that's where he missed weight against Paulo Costa, got that work from Paulo Costa, and then we sent him flying.
He looked terrible. Mm-hmm. He looked terrible. There was not even a shell of Johnny Hendricks. Now I don't want to. I feel bad for saying this, but when he was at 170 and he looked like a madman, that was before USADA. That was when they could use IV, replenishments. I'm not saying nothing. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying nothing, but a little suspect. I will say that.
Yeah, of course. But that leads us on to a lot of people, when we talk about the GOAT thing, for instance, the greatest of all time, and that will be a completely different episode that, Brian, I hope you're going to join us for. But people's kind of vision of what the GOAT needs to be is someone that can compete in two weight categories. So if someone's fighting at 155, to be the GOAT, they need to fight at 170. Or if you're 170, you need to fight at 185. Like Israel Adesanya, for example, is obviously fought at 185. He's going to go up to 205. and then he's got plans to go to heavyweight, which is obviously an uncapped limit, or the limit of 265. But he would never reach that with his frame. I don't think. He would take him years to put on that amount of muscle. But why the MMA community putting so much pressure on people to jump through these hoops to be in all of these divisions when they physically can't do it, or to put so much weight onto your body, or to remove so much weight off your body? Why do you have to do that to be considered the GOAT? Do you know what I mean? For me, I just don't understand that. To be the GOAT, we'll obviously discuss that at a different time, but why do people assume that you have to do 2 different weight categories to be the GOAT?
So I'll just bring up this example here. Sorry if I was going to cut you off there, Brian, but I wanted to talk about John Jones in that respect. And he is often someone that is discussed as the MMA GOAT, right? He is the guy that finished a lot of those guys in their what we now, hindsight 2020, look at as the later stages of Rampage Jackson's career and Rashad Evans' career, and all of these guys that he was able to really give that work to. When you look at John Jones now going up to heavyweight, we were talking again, another subject that we were talking on prior to the podcast was that we felt like, what was John Jones's reason for going up to heavyweight? And we were trying to figure out what really attracts him there. And it's like, okay, well, he's got big fights. He's got Stipe, he's got Francis. Those are big fights. He's got Derek Lewis. That's a big fight, I would say. But what is he going to prove there that he hasn't already proved at 205, right? And the other thing we were talking about before the podcast started was John Jones looking kind of bored in there. He looks bored when he's playing with these guys now. And I feel like him going up to heavyweight is not going to be dissimilar to what happened at 205. He's going to go in with that same game plan that you've seen in the last couple of fights, which is to obviously keep them at a distance with the front leg side kick, typical John Jones, and then to clinch and look for the takedown. And I feel like he'll have a success against a lot of those guys like Francis, like Stipe, like Derek Lewis, and any of those guys. So what does he really achieve here? And I feel like for me, when I look at John Jones, and from my perspective, what I look at as his motivation for going up is to really just solidify that he's able to take a good shot. Because what else are you really going up to heavyweight to really prove? You're proving that you can take a big hit from a big 265-pound dude that doesn't put you down, doesn't put you out. When, if you look at his last fight with Dominic Reyes, and even though he won, he was getting that work all the way through the fight, all 5 rounds. I don't think, the amount of times you got hit by Dominic Reyes, imagine if Francis Ngannou hit you that amount of times. And Francis Ngannou is fast and explosive. So he has the ability to do that, lest we forget Mr. Jones. But I think, to his credit as well, and what we've talked about is, when you do go up in the weight class, it seems to give you almost like an extra layer of chin. And I'm hoping I'm assuming that's what he's hoping for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And him going up could also be to solidify himself as the GOAT, as the greatest of all time, because then he would have competed in 2 different weight categories. That could also be another reason to cement his legacy. Because if he's considered the MMA GOAT at the moment, if he goes up and clears out the heavyweight division, there's going to be no question as to whether he's the GOAT, right?
GSP is the MMA GOAT, and you're all wrong.
When we talk about the GOAT, we talk about the greatest of all time. Now, if we wanted to put the UFC and MMA in a vacuum and stop it at 258 and talk about the GOAT, then yeah, we could do it. We could go round and round about it. But there is going to be somebody that is going to come after, and it's going to beat the person that people think is the GOAT at the time. And then that person's going to go on, and Joe Rogan's going to be putting his hand on his heads and saying, this guy is the greatest of all time. And I know that we want to talk about this later, but I wish that we could say that these people are great for their time. Because when we look at it, I mean, you got people like Mark Coleman, right? Who's a trailblazer in the heavyweight, the first heavyweight champion, and then went over to Pride and won a Grand Prix over there. Okay. You got people like Vanderlei Silva, who was from 99 to 2005, totally undefeated in Pride. You got people like Mauricio Shogun Hua, who won Grand Prix, won championships, and then came over to the UFC and won the light heavyweight championship. You got a ton of guys that you could say, yeah, I mean, you got a ton of guys that you can sit there and say, okay, this person could rank up there. It's a never-ending argument. And like Connor said the other day, there's like subdivisions of everything.
Yeah, man.
It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. You know, the thing we haven't touched on with weight cutting is obviously the women's divisions as well. There's a lot of women that are moving in and around the divisions at the moment. Obviously, we saw Alexa Grasso moving up from 155 to 125, I believe it was, at the weekend. She was just cutting too much weight and she didn't feel like she was comfortable with that weight. But, you know, it's annoying because we haven't got any females here to be able to talk about, you know, weight cutting when they're necessarily menstruating, for instance. It's not something you hear about a lot. I think there is a podcast out there called like Women in Fighting, and they talk about that kind of stuff. And, you know, I've always said this, I'd love to get someone on and talk about females weight cutting, but Jessica Ai is a perfect example. She obviously struggles a lot on the scales. And there was someone at the beginning of the year that, if I remember rightly, that missed by like 2 pounds. And then she just basically said like, I can't cut this much weight, sorry, because I'm literally on my period. Like, so I can't cut these 2 pounds because my body's holding water in a different way. I physically can't do it. And then she lost 30% of her purse. And I was listening to this on the Fight Disciples podcast as well, and they said, well, that's just ridiculous. And I agree with them. It's ridiculous because the fighter is losing money that is their livelihood. Do you know what I mean? They get paid to fight. They're out there. And she said, I physically cannot cut this weight. It will not come off of me unless I cut my foot off. Do you know what I mean? I think to take someone's money from a situation that is unavoidable is just not fair. You know, in my own opinion, personally, I think that's not fair. And the UFC and MMA need to take into consideration the fact that women go through different shit to men, and they're not going to be able to get down to those weight divisions, you know? But, Prath, what do you think about women's MMA, man?
As it regards to the UFC, I do believe that the one thing that really has stunted the UFC is their ability to add these weight classes quite later on than they really should have implemented them, like the 125 women's weight class that was brought in so long after it was asked and begged. I remember Jojo Calderwood used to beg for the 125 weight class, and now that she had, and I believe she ended up being the first 125-pound weight fight in the UFC before the weight class was even made. That's how bad it was. And so there was nothing bridging 135 to 115 for a really, really long time. And, you know, there are weight classes below that I do think that the UFC should bring in, like the atomweight division. That's definitely one of the next weight classes they should bring in. If they do, there are so many great atomweight fighters like Michelle Watson, like Jinu Frey, like Ayaki Hamasaki, who used to fight, who fights in Invicta. Like, these are all elite atomweight fighters that should be fighting at their natural weight class. Michelle Watson has had to come over to the UFC, and because she's in the UFC, she now has to fight at 115. Maybe that's good for her. Maybe she realized that it was time for her to do that, because I remember her last fight before she came to the UFC, she lost the strap. The Invicta strap to another girl. So maybe she felt like it was the right time for her to move up. But man, I got to completely agree with you as well. I think it's absolute bullshit for any promotion to be able to take money away from someone because of the way that their body metaphysically works. It's like, you have no right to be able to say to someone, hey, you are going through this right now. And it's not accounted for as well. It's not like she lined up her period to come at the same time as the fight was happening, right? That's absurd, right? To believe that would happen. But that's essentially what they're implying that this girl has done, and they saw it that they would take 30% away from her purse. So I think that that's a really like old way of thinking about things. And I think that they should really look at a lot of these women's experiences. And you know what? They have like, you know, women like Laura Sanko, for instance, who was an ex-MMA fighter and is someone that I would say is very respected by, you know, the Dana Whites of the world and things like that. So why don't we take someone like that who has experience in the situation to go and make some of these rules? Like, we look at someone like John McCarthy, who made a lot of those early rules, right? It's because we felt like he had the mind to be able to create that rule book. But things have changed so much over the years that it's almost like revisionist history, right? We've got to go back and look at this and go, we need to make these changes. And it's very slow. And because everyone kind of adheres to what Vegas does, it really makes the rest of the world struggle. And I say the rest of the world, excluding Japan, because that's definitely one thing I would love to touch on, is what the guys over in One Championship have done. And I think the women of their fight division look exponentially better you look at someone like Angela Lee, who is like, I would say probably like the face athlete of one championship from the female perspective and from the male perspective, to be honest. She is someone that has really struggled to make those lower weight classes and has since looked incredible since they've brought in this new weight cutting, the way that they handle the weight cutting procedure. I'm not going to say it is a weight cutting procedure, because if you look at someone like Mighty Mouse, who was cutting down to 125, weighs 138, and was thinking, okay, why am I cutting 13 pounds out of my weight to just make this weight class? Right. He now fights at 135. So he's only cutting 3 pounds in weight, which is a diet job, right? More so than you having to physically cut anything on the week of the fight. So I know Brian's got some facts here to drop around one championship and the weight cutting method. So I'm going to throw it right over to him.
Yeah, the athletes, they said that they're assigned a weight class from their walkout or from their walk around weight and their weight cutting in the training sessions. They're also they need to take a hydration test, and also if they want to cut weight to go down to a different weight class, they have to do it in a when they're not actually in a fight. I think it's the 8-week competition zone. So if they say, okay, hey, I want to go down to this weight, they have to do it outside of that competition zone. So it's all on them. You know what I mean? It's not a competitive advantage or anything like that. They also get weighed in week or on the weeks of their fights. They get periodically weight checked. The hydration, if their hydration is not right on the fight week, they're automatically disqualified. Yeah. So I mean that's a great thing that somebody's doing it, but it's also because someone died cutting weight in one championships. So I've said this numerous times in this podcast, so I'm going to say it one more time or on the show. I'm not anti-cutting weight. Okay. But what is it going to take for the UFC to put some sort of rule in motion? I mean, is it going to take someone dying or someone, because they can say, okay, Johnny Hendricks fell out of the fight. Renan Barão fell out of the fight. Bobby Green fell out of the fight. Right.
I was literally going to say Bobby Green, someone who last week.
I was going to say the same thing.
Last week he fell over, hit his head on the floor. That's scary when he's already depleted. He's already at 155, 156 at that point.
Right. And then what does the UFC do? They say, well, screw it. Scratch that fight. We still have 10 fights to go on this card and nobody's going to notice. Let's go ahead and move Ricky Simone and Keller up to the main card and just blow everybody's mind.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
But what do you think about the 30% kind of drop or the pay drop? What do you think 30% is enough? Do you think if they said, right, we're going to take 90% of your purse if you miss weight, then people will be like, oh shit, I'm not weighing 155. I'm going to 170, man, because I don't want to lose 90% of the money that I'm about to make. You'd automatically fight at a higher weight, wouldn't you?
What you would see is what ONE FC are doing, but naturally. Like they wouldn't have to bring in a rule because people would be so afraid of losing 90% of their paycheck, they would automatically have to fight somewhere closer to them because you can never take that guarantee. And I think a lot of these guys roll into fight week hoping that they're going to make weight, not necessarily going, okay, I'm going to make weight.
It's not very often I disagree with you guys, but I disagree with you guys. I think what you would see is a lot of people doing exactly what happened with Bobby Green. You would see a lot of people trying to make this weight and doing anything possible. If money is a motivator, you know what I mean? Money is a motivator. So if they're saying that, okay, I am at 155, if I'm going to lose 90% of my purse and I have to still pay my trainers, I still have to pay, this and that, and I'm not getting sponsors anymore, obviously. You're going to see people do extreme things to cut weight. And that's when you would see bad things happen. Really bad things happen, I think.
I think it would go one of two ways. Either people would move up in a weight. Obviously, it's quite difficult going from 155 to 170 because there's nothing in the middle. And we've touched on this before about there being something to kind of bridge that gap. But I think you'd either see people just going, you know what, I'm just going to stick up my weight now because I can comfortably make 170 or 185, whatever it might be, instead of killing themselves and losing 90%. And exactly as you say, they've got to pay dietitians, they've got to pay their trainers, they've got to pay their rent to live in their house. Do you know what I mean? They've got so many things to pay for. But a lot of these fighters, especially in the prelims and building up to the prelims and stuff, they don't have dietitians coming into this. They are literally going into this raw almost and kind of going, all right, well, I need to lose some weight. I'm just going to sit in a sauna. I think Jose Aldo actually said that he went on to keto, which is a diet that is obviously fat-based, and then the ketones start developing in your liver and stuff like that. I did it myself, and I lost about 6 kilos in probably about 5 or 6 days. And I wasn't even competing for anything. I just did it because I like doing some stupid diets every now and again. But he had the people behind him telling him to go on to keto to be able to cut down to 135, I believe it was. But if he didn't have them people around him and had the money, he wouldn't be able to go down there. But I think the people that are fighting on the undercards and stuff, they would all change their weight classes because they just wouldn't make it, man.
Now, I agree with you. I mean, on some aspect of that, the lower fighters do not have what the big money makers have. But also, if they go up to that weight, right, to a 170 from a 155 that they're struggling to get to, are they going to be competitive there? Are they going to be competitive at the top where those guys, like you just said, have the dietitians that will get them down to 170? You just won't. You will not take somebody that, say an Aaron Pico, okay? An Aaron Pico. You're not going to take him and you're not going to put him. Oh, sorry, guys. You're not going to take. Sorry, guys. You're not going to take somebody like him and put him up against somebody like Kamaru Usman, just because he can't make 155 anymore, and he's not making that kind of money, and he's going to go up to what's that? It's just, I don't know. It's a hard thing to do, really. It's a hard subject to argue with and against.
Yeah, of course. There's so many pros and cons, and there's so many, we could right all the wrongs of the world on this podcast, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's the people that are sitting in the big chair that are going to be making these decisions, right?
Exactly.
What I will give credit to the UFC for is I would believe it's probably in the last year or so, maybe a little bit more than a year. They've been working with Trifecta during the fight week and giving these guys the kind of meal plans to get through that last week. I don't know if they're helping them throughout camp or is it just for that last week, but I think that's a really good addition to those lower paid fighters, to the prelim fighters that may not necessarily have that dietitian. But again, that's only something that's come in the last year or so. And I would say it's weight cutting at its prevalent and worst was pre-2015, pre-USADA, that I think it was the 185. Jesus, I forget the number of the UFC card. That was the McGregor Mendez one with the Rory McDonald Robbie Lawler fight. That was the first fight that they brought all of these regulations into. And so if you look at it at its worst time, 2015 that was when it was at its categorically worse. And we see in the worse cases of these guys really trying to do their most to get down to the least. And I think another one, I think this happened just after USADA came through, and it was another one where it was just a really bad performance coming down. He had one really good performance and then he had a terrible performance, was Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis came down to 145, fought Charles Oliveira and beat him, and then absolutely got demolished by Max Holloway. Yeah. And between those two fights, you kind of think to yourself, what changed between the two? He was able to get to 146 against Charles and have a great fight. I would say it was a really good fight. He didn't look particularly drained. He didn't look particularly void of the skills that he is known for. Then he fights Max Holloway and looks a completely different person. What changed between those two camps for him to really struggle at that last weight? And I think Brian's about to drop some knowledge here, so I'll just
I'm just saying it's 1 pound.
Yeah,
it's 1
pound. 1 pound.
Wow, it's 1 pound. And I mean, that's what people that have never cut weight don't realize. And like we said, you get in that sauna, you have 2 pounds to go, you get out of that sauna, and you've only dropped 0.3. It's demoralizing. And then you have to get drug back in there and drug back out and so many times. But that 1 pound makes a difference.
Absolutely. A friend of mine is a boxer, and he was like, he needed to cut 2 pound essentially, and he had like 3 or 4 hours before he weighed in. And it's obviously on the day weigh-ins when you're like an amateur and stuff like that. And he was like, shit, I need to lose like 2 pound. And he was like, I've depleted myself of everything. I haven't eaten in like 2 days. And he's got quite a big frame as well. And he was eating Hubba Bubba. You know what Hubba Bubba is, right? And he was eating Hubba Bubba, and he had like 20 packs of this shit. And he would put it in his mouth, chew, chew, chew. His mouth would produce saliva, and he would spit it out. And he actually lost the 2 pounds that he needed to lose through chewing Hubba Bubba and spitting it out, which is absolutely crazy. I just can't believe that. But Brian, you were actually talking about that before we started, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like my brother did that at 9 years old, or however he was. I guess he was in 4th grade, so I think he was 9 years old, running around in a sauna suit with a fireball piece of candy, producing saliva and spitting it out. So it's just it's the tricks. It's the tricks of the trade, but those tricks of the trade are dangerous.
Where do you draw the line? At what age do you draw the line? And I think allowing children to deplete themselves of this energy and then go in and compete against other people who, I think the other thing as well is competitively looking at the other people that are doing it with you, who are also going through those struggles but are able to come through and win, makes the competition even more fierce.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Go ahead, Brian. What are you going to say, man?
You see this happening at such a young age anymore that it's I love my parents were great parents. They were just they just didn't understand what was going on with my brother. They didn't understand that. But you see parents now in a highly competitive sport of wrestling, and you see these parents pushing their kids to, at the ages of 7 years old, to cut to a certain weight, to get to a tournament that in the end doesn't mean shit. Cale Sanderson from Penn State is not at Bantam State in Illinois recruiting kids to come and wrestle in college. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That just doesn't, it blows my mind. I understand the competition of things, building your children up, helping them out, but to make them physically hurt themselves, because it does hurt them. To physically hurt them, that's just, it is mind blowing.
Yeah, and it all comes down to the coach as well. The boxing gym that I used to go to when I was a little bit younger, the coach would literally be like, look at you and be like, cool, what do you weigh now? You'd be like, oh, I'm 65. And he'd be like, cool, we'll get you down to 78. And he just looked at you and said, right, you need to drop 7 kilos, which is like 15, 16 pounds or something. But he'd just look at you and say that to you straight off the bat. And you think, how do you know what my body structure is like? How do you know that I can get down to that, the muscle mass that I'm carrying, the water that I'm carrying or whatever? Because no body is the same, obviously. And it's just insane, man. It's just insane. Obviously, you see it all the time in wrestling, but over here it's not as well known, I don't think, because wrestling is such a big thing in the States, and weight cutting in wrestling is such a big thing as well. We obviously don't have that over here in the UK,
And
well, I would argue and say that we do, but we just have it. We don't have it on as large of a scale as the American sports culture is. Exactly. We have it for boxing, but we have so many weight classes that it doesn't really factor in as much of a big deal, because they have smaller increments to be able to get to. But yeah, I think the wildness of the amount of weight classes that you get in American style wrestling is crazy as well.
Yeah, and the age, now that they have regulations in high school now. They do the hydration test there. They do, a body fat percentage there. I think it's you can't be below 7% body fat. But where is there no regulation at? There's no regulation in kids, in the kids aspect of it. And so, if just a personal story, if my son, if he says, hey, I'm going to wrestle in this tournament, right? Okay, let's wrestle in this tournament. Okay, there's a set weight. Okay, it's 58 pounds. Well, how much do you weigh? Well, I weigh 59. Okay, well, in practice you'll be able to cut that. That'll be all right. That's not a big deal. But if he told me that, he says, well, I want to cut down to 54 pounds. Well, how much do you weigh, Nolan? Well, I weigh 59 pounds. No, we're not doing that. You got to put your foot down, really. And it's the parent. In the end, it's the parent's choice. The parent's decision, not choice. It's the decision that the parents should make.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And on that bombshell, parenting knowledge from Brian, we're going to wrap it up. Honestly, this has been an absolutely fantastic episode. I've really enjoyed, talking about weight cutting and stuff. And as we mentioned in the middle of the episode, we will be talking about the GOAT conversation as well. Naturally, there is just so many different angles of looking at it. And as Brian said, we were talking the other day about it, the subdivisions of being the GOAT. One of my GOATs of women's MMA is Amanda Nunes, because she didn't take a fight because she wanted to have a fucking kid. I think she's a GOAT just for wanting to go and make a fucking family, man. I love that shit. But anyway, we'll talk about that another day. Prath, as always, thank you very much for being the co-host of the show and sharing your knowledge. Brian, I cannot thank you enough for jumping on the show as well, man. And I think whenever you want to come on, you are more than welcome. It's been great to have you on here. And if anyone wants to follow Brian, you're gonna shout yourself out now, Brian, right?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. It's at MADDOGMMA. I'm not into this for followers or anything like that. I'm into this to meet up with some people that actually love the sport. I found 2 guys that do, and we'll keep on going. So I appreciate what you guys do, and let's keep this going.
Nice one, man. Thank you very much. As always, hit like, hit subscribe, because we want the followers. Hit like, hit subscribe. Share, tell your mum, tell her best friend, tell your mum's best friend's cousin. It doesn't matter. Get them on the show, get them watching. And as Brian said, man, connect the MMA community. We're over here in London, and Brian's over in Illinois, which is crazy that we've even had this conversation. Do you know what I mean? But Brian, thank you again for jumping on, and I look forward to seeing you soon, man.
Yes, sir.